What would you do if the woman marrying your son shoved your wife into a mud puddle in front of 300 guests, and your son laughed? My name is Gregory, and until that day, I thought I knew exactly who my son was. The wedding had cost more than my first house. 300 guests filled the estate grounds. The band was playing. Champagne glasses were raised. People were smiling for photographs. From the outside, it looked like the happiest day of our family's life. By the end of the afternoon, I had taken back a house worth nearly $500,000, removed my son from my company, and walked out of his wedding while the entire room sat in stunned silence. One sentence stopped the celebration cold. One sentence made the bride's father put down his champagne glass. One sentence changed my son's future. But none of that happened because of the microphone. It happened because of what my son chose to do when his mother needed him most. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone you love get humiliated right in front of you, while everyone else stood there pretending it wasn't a big deal? Have you ever looked at a family member and suddenly realized you didn't recognize the person standing there anymore? Because that's exactly what happened to me. Most people think the worst part of this story was the shove. It wasn't. The mud washed off. The ruined dress could be replaced. The real damage came from a choice my son made seconds later. A choice that told me everything I needed to know about the man he had become. I didn't yell. I didn't start a fight. I didn't ruin the wedding. I made one phone call, and before this reception was over, that call would cost my son more than he ever thought possible. If family betrayal stories hit close to home, subscribe now, and also tell me where in world you are watching from. The next twist changes everything. To understand why I walked to that microphone, you need to understand who my son used to be. My wife Diane and I weren't born into money. Everything we had, we earned the hard way. 30 years ago, we started a small construction company in Ohio with one used pickup truck, a handful of tools, and more determination than common sense. During those early years, there were weeks when we weren't sure how we were going to pay our bills. I spent my days on job sites pouring concrete, framing houses, and taking any contract I could get. Diane handled the books from our kitchen table after finishing her regular job. There were no shortcuts, no wealthy relatives, no lucky break, just long hours and constant work. I still remember winter mornings when I'd leave the house before sunrise and come home after dark with my hands aching from the cold. Weekends weren't weekends. They were extra work days. While other families were taking vacations, Diane and I were calculating payroll, meeting suppliers, and figuring out how to keep the business moving forward. The goal was always the same: give our son a better life than we had. Zachary never had to worry about whether the lights would stay on. He never had to wear hand-me-down clothes or wonder if there would be enough money for school activities. Diane and I made sure of that. And honestly, we were happy to do it. Some of my favorite memories are from those years. Sitting in the bleachers at Zachary's Little League games, helping him practice his swing in the backyard. Watching him grin from ear to ear when I handed him the keys to his first truck on his 16th birthday. The kid nearly tackled me with excitement. When college came around, Diane and I paid every tuition bill without hesitation. We wanted him focused on building a future, not worrying about debt. For a long time, I believed those sacrifices meant something. I believed Zachary understood where his opportunities came from. I believed he respected the people who helped create them. Looking back now, maybe Diane and I made a mistake. Maybe we worked so hard giving our son a comfortable life that he never learned what it cost to build one. The change didn't happen overnight. It rarely does. At first it was small enough to ignore. A comment here, a dismissive attitude there. Little moments that didn't seem important at the time. But somewhere along the way, our son stopped appreciating what built his life. And then he met Chloe. When Zachary first introduced us to Chloe, I understood why he was attracted to her. She was confident, polished, and knew exactly how to make a good first impression. The first few times we met, she was pleasant enough. She asked questions about our business, complimented Diane's cooking, and laughed at my terrible jokes. Nothing seemed out of place, at least not at first. The warning signs started small. One evening, we took her to a local family restaurant that had been around for decades. Diane loved that place. We'd celebrated birthdays there, graduations there, and more business milestones than I could count. Halfway through dinner, Chloe glanced around the dining room and quietly asked Zachary, "Do people actually choose to come here?" She said it with a smile, but it wasn't a joke. I noticed Zachary laugh. Diane noticed too. Another time, I watched Chloe snap her fingers at a server because she wanted a refill faster. When a construction worker accidentally brushed against her shoulder at a community event, she looked at him as though he'd ruined her entire evening. The man immediately apologized. She didn't acknowledge him. The moment that bothered me most happened during a family barbecue. Diane was telling a story when Chloe interrupted her in front of everyone. "That's not exactly how it happened," she said. The correction wasn't necessary. It wasn't even important. Yet somehow, she seemed determined to make Diane look foolish. My wife laughed it off. I didn't. As months passed, Chloe's expensive tastes became impossible to ignore. Every dinner had to be at the newest restaurant. Every vacation destination had to be impressive enough for social media photos. Every purchase became a discussion about image and appearance. What worried me most wasn't Chloe. It was Zachary. The son who once spent weekends helping me on job sites started acting embarrassed by the business that paid for his education. He stopped introducing me as the owner of a successful company. Instead, he'd say things like, "My dad works construction." The words weren't insulting on their own. The tone was. Soon, conversations became centered around status, connections, and appearances. Things that had never mattered to him before. Diane noticed the changes too. But whenever I expressed concern, she'd squeeze my hand and say the same thing. "I just want our son to be happy." So when Chloe pushed for a larger engagement party, we paid. When she demanded a more expensive venue, we paid. When she requested upgrades, additions, and last-minute changes to the wedding plans, we paid again. Looking back, every demand should have told me something. Instead, I convinced myself it was normal wedding stress. I kept believing things would settle down after the ceremony. I couldn't have been more wrong. Then came the wedding day. The morning of the wedding started beautifully. A storm had passed through the area the night before, leaving the air cool and fresh. The estate grounds looked incredible. White chairs lined the ceremony lawn. Fresh flowers decorated every walkway. Staff members moved quietly between guests, making sure everything ran smoothly. Months of planning had finally come together. There was only one small problem. The rain had left patches of thick clay mud near the reception pavilion. Most people avoided those areas without even thinking about it. As photographs began after the ceremony, guests gathered around the gardens and pathways, while the photographer directed family members into position. I remember standing off to the side, watching Diane. She looked genuinely happy. Her lavender dress matched the flowers she had spent weeks helping select. Her eyes never drifted far from Zachary. Every few seconds, she'd smile as if she couldn't believe her little boy was getting married. For a moment, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with 30 years earlier. Proud, excited, completely focused on her family. The photographer was arranging a large group picture when it happened. Diane stepped backward without realizing how close she was to Chloe's wedding train. She didn't step on it. She didn't damage it. She simply moved too close while trying to make room for another guest. Most people would have politely asked for space. Chloe wasn't most people. Her face twisted with anger. "Get away from my dress." The words cut through the crowd. Several guests turned immediately. Before Diane could even apologize, Chloe shoved her. Hard. Everything seemed to slow down. I watched Diane lose her balance. I watched her arms reach out instinctively, trying to steady herself. I heard shocked gasps ripple through the crowd. Then she fell. Her body hit the muddy ground with a heavy splash. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The lavender dress was instantly stained dark brown. Wet clay covered her sleeves. Mud streaked across her hands. Even worse, part of it splashed onto her face. 300 guests stood there watching my wife struggle to sit up. A woman who had helped pay for every flower, every meal, every chair, and every piece of music at that wedding. A woman who had done nothing wrong. I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I had experienced in years. Not because of the dress. Not because of the embarrassment. Because of the cruelty. Because Chloe looked down at Diane as though she deserved it. I started moving toward my wife immediately. My only thought was helping her get off the ground. At that moment, I believed Chloe was the biggest problem standing in front of me. I was wrong. Because what shattered me wasn't Chloe. It was my son. If someone treated your mother this way, what would you do? Tell us below. I reached Diane within seconds. The crowd finally began to move, but by then, I was already kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" I asked. It was a stupid question. Of course she wasn't okay. Her hands were trembling as she tried to push herself up. Mud covered her palms. Her dress was ruined. A streak of brown clay ran across her cheek. What hurt the most was the expression on her face. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Confusion. As though she genuinely couldn't understand why someone would treat her that way. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and helped her stand. For a moment, I thought she might cry. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back immediately. That was Diane. Always worried about making other people uncomfortable, even when she was the one hurting. "It's fine," she whispered. It clearly wasn't. Yet she still tried to smile. That smile nearly broke me. As I brushed mud from her sleeve, I finally looked toward Zachary. I expected shock. I expected concern. I expected him to rush over and help his mother. Instead, I watched him walk directly to Chloe. He slipped an arm around her waist. The two of them looked at Diane. Then Zachary leaned closer and whispered something into Chloe's ear. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. Chloe burst into laughter. Not nervous laughter. Not awkward laughter. Mocking laughter. The kind of laugh people make when they think they've gotten away with something. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Others quickly turned away. Nobody seemed to know what to do. I stood there staring at my son, and suddenly years of excuses disappeared. Every rude comment, every warning sign, every moment I had convinced myself wasn't a big deal. They all came rushing back at once. The truth became impossible to ignore. My son wasn't shocked by what happened. He approved of it. That realization hurt more than watching Diane fall. Because Chloe wasn't my family. Zachary was. Or at least I thought he was. Without saying another word, I guided Diane toward the bridal suite inside the estate. A couple of attendants rushed over with towels and offered to help her clean up. I thanked them and made sure Diane was settled before stepping back outside. The celebration continued as if nothing had happened. Music played. Guests chatted. Champagne flowed. But for me, everything had changed. I walked across the parking area, pulled out my phone, and stared at one name in my contacts. Mr. Sterling. And that's when I called the lawyer. Mr. Sterling answered on the second ring. "Gregory, everything all right?" For a few seconds, I couldn't respond. I stood there staring across the estate grounds while guests laughed and celebrated in the distance. The wedding was still moving forward. The photographs, the music, the toasts. Nobody seemed to understand that something important had just broken. Finally, I took a breath. "No," I said, "everything is not all right." Then I explained what had happened. Not every detail, just enough. The shove, the humiliation, the laughter. There was a brief silence on the other end. Mr. Sterling had known my family for years. He knew Diane. He knew how much she had sacrificed for Zachary. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. I looked toward the reception pavilion. Then I made a decision that had been waiting for this exact moment. A decision neither Zachary nor Chloe knew was possible. Several months earlier, Diane and I had purchased a beautiful colonial-style home on Oak Drive. 4 bedrooms. Large front porch. Quiet neighborhood. The kind of home young couples dream about starting their lives in. We had paid for it in full. No mortgage, no financing, no debt attached. The plan was simple. We were going to surprise Zachary and Chloe during the reception. It was supposed to be our biggest wedding gift, a reward for all the years we believed our son had grown into a good man. Fortunately, one detail saved me. The transfer paperwork hadn't been completed yet. Legally, the house still belonged entirely to me. "Stop everything," I told Mr. Sterling. "The property transfer is canceled." He didn't hesitate. "I'll take care of it. I also want it listed for sale immediately." Consider it done. For the first time since Diane fell into the mud, I felt completely calm. But I wasn't finished. There was another issue that needed to be addressed. Zachary worked for my company, not because he had earned ownership, because I had been preparing him to eventually inherit part of what Diane and I built. That plan ended with one laugh. I told Mr. Sterling to begin drafting the paperwork necessary to remove Zachary from the company's future succession structure. No ownership path, no executive role waiting for him, no special treatment. Nothing. As the call ended, one thought became crystal clear. At that moment, I stopped funding disrespect. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and turned toward the reception hall. But I wasn't finished. When I walked back into the reception hall, nobody seemed aware of what had just happened outside. Guests were eating dinner. Servers moved between tables carrying trays of food. The band played softly near the dance floor. Laughter drifted through the room. It was as though Diane's humiliation had already been forgotten. I spotted my wife seated near the back of the hall. She had changed into a spare outfit provided by one of the wedding coordinators. Her eyes were still red, but she gave me a small nod when she saw me. She knew me well enough to recognize that I had made a decision. A few minutes later, the wedding coordinator stepped onto the stage. She tapped the microphone and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the father of the groom's toast." Several guests applauded. I stood from my chair and began walking toward the stage. Each step felt strangely calm, not angry, not emotional, certain. The band lowered their instruments as I reached the microphone. Conversations faded. The room settled. 300 people turned their attention toward me. At the head table, Chloe looked delighted. She assumed she was about to hear a glowing speech. Beside her, Zachary leaned back in his chair, wearing the confident smile I'd seen all day. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. I adjusted the microphone and looked around the room. "Thank you all for being here today." A few guests nodded politely. "I've spent most of my life believing that family is built through love, sacrifice, and respect." The room remained quiet. I glanced toward Diane, then back toward Zachary. For 30 years, my wife and I worked to create opportunities for our son. Several guests smiled, expecting a heartfelt story. Instead, I continued. "Many of you don't know this, but Diane and I purchased a home on Oak Drive as a wedding gift for Zachary and Chloe." A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd. People exchanged impressed looks. Chloe's smile grew wider. Then, I delivered the next sentence. "That gift has been revoked." The room froze. I heard a fork hit the floor somewhere near the back. A few guests gasped. Others stared at me in disbelief. I didn't stop. Today I watched my wife be publicly humiliated. Now every eye in the room was locked on me. I also watched my son laugh about it. Zachary's face immediately changed. The confidence vanished. And because respect is required before generosity, the house will be listed for sale. Silence. Absolute silence. I continued. Effective immediately, Zachary is also removed from our company payroll. More gasps. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Several guests turned toward the head table. But there was one final truth that needed to be said. He will no longer have any ownership path in the business Diane and I spent our lives building. The shock that swept through the room was impossible to miss. Faces froze. Conversations died. Nobody moved. But the most shocking reaction came from Chloe's father. "Subscribe before the next family betrayal catches you off guard." Chloe's father, Harrison, was sitting only a few feet from the head table. The moment I finished speaking, he slowly lowered his champagne glass onto the table. His expression told the entire story. For the first time that day, he understood exactly what his daughter had done. More importantly, he understood what it had cost. Across the room, Chloe's confidence disappeared. Her face turned pale. She looked from me to Zachary and back again, searching for someone to fix the situation. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to argue about. The decisions had already been made. Zachary finally pushed his chair back and stood. His face was bright red with anger. "Dad." I raised a hand. Not to threaten him. To stop him, because I wasn't interested in excuses. Not after what I had witnessed. Not after the years of warnings I had ignored. Not after watching his mother sit in the mud while he chose laughter over loyalty. He took another step toward me. I simply switched off the microphone. The sharp click echoed through the silent room. That conversation wasn't going to happen on his terms. I stepped away from the stage and walked directly toward Diane. The entire hall seemed frozen in place. Guests watched quietly as I reached my wife. Without saying a word, I held out my hand. She took it immediately. Together, we walked toward the exit. No dramatic farewell, no final argument, no second chances offered in front of an audience. Just two people choosing dignity over disrespect. As we stepped outside, the evening air felt lighter than it had all day. Looking back now, I don't think I lost a son that afternoon. I lost the illusion of one. The boy Diane and I raised would have helped his mother stand. The man at that wedding chose differently. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Respect matters more than blood. Money can create opportunities. It can open doors. It can provide comfort, but it cannot build character. Character reveals itself when nobody expects consequences. So tell me, did I go too far by taking back the house and removing my son from the company? Or was it the consequence he earned? Let me know below.